Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, Tom and I met in 1966. He was a assistant pastor at St. Austin's in North Minneapolis, 42nd and Thomas, and I was an assistant pastor at Victory Lutheran Church, 1 block away, 43rd and Thomas. And right away, I discovered someone who was very ecumenical. He actually would talk to Lutherans. And I remember one day calling him up and I said, "This is Martin Luther speaking," and right away he answered, "Where in hell are you?" When our daughter was born in December of 1966, I think Tom was the first visitor we had as he came over to congratulate us. But I introduced him to my younger brother, Mark, who's sitting where? Mark was sitting over there. There's Mark. All right. So they got to be friends. Well, then Mark decided to get married to Margie, who's right. There's Margie. They keep moving on me here. And so, but it was going to be in Los Angeles. And so Tom and I decided to drive, and I had an intern at that time by the name of Mark Hansen, who's now the presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And the three of us decided to drive to California for Mark's wedding. And Tom said, you know, Tom, I have a deal. I know this guy who has a big Pontiac that we can drive all the way to California for nothing. Wonderful. So the day comes and he shows up in a Pontiac Firebird. We can't even fit 3 people in it. And from the moment we started driving, the car starts to fall apart. The electrical system went. We had to stop and go and repairs a couple times. So much for Tom's deals. Then I'll never forget. We went through a town called Liberal, Kansas. It was that's a misnomer. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. And Mark Hansen was driving, and he had rather long hair in those days. And we were pulled over in a 15-mile-an-hour zone or something like that. And he was going 30 through town and got pulled over. And we thought, uh-oh, redneck cop, Kansas, long-haired driver, we are in trouble. So Tom said, "Let me handle this." He got out of the car, walked back to talk to the priest, to the cop, and Mark and I switched places quickly so that somebody with little hair could replace somebody with long hair. And as Tom was walking back to the car with the cop, I heard the cop say, "Have a nice trip now, Father." Then we got to the wedding, and Tom was a groomsman in the wedding, and he said, when he accepted that, he said to Mark, "Don't tell my bishop that I'm going to be a groomsman in your wedding." And then at the reception, they throw the garter. Tom caught it. We flew back. We didn't drive again. I thought of at our table, I guess my wife Jackie said, "You should ask how many people here have had Tom come to see them, fly in, go to see them when you've had some kind of a crisis in your family. How many of you would raise your hands?" Most of us at some time or another have had Tom show up when we needed him, and always there. Our daughter was diagnosed with cancer some years ago, and I never forget, Tom called right after that and he said, "I have a friend in Calcutta, India, Father Peter, and he's going to say a mass for Deanna at the tomb of Mother Teresa." And I said, "Wow." And then he said, "By the way, Father Peter and Mother Teresa are both wonderful prayers." And so Tom is connected all over the world, as you know, and now his stories are more about hospice. He is helping on hospice, and not long ago he got a hold of us and he said Fred is going to host a meeting at his house for Sister Cyril, who has a school in Calcutta. Was it Calcutta? Yes. And we're going to do a fundraiser there. So we were invited over to Fred's house to a wonderful meal, and Sister showed us her pictures from Calcutta, and Tom was help sponsoring her here and still keeps in touch with her. So that's what Tom is doing, and as he works now for the Cross Ministries, he's raising money, and we sat with his director over here, said he's the best one we got. He's raising money for the poor and loves it, and we meet him quite often here at this club, and he'll tell us about his latest travels, so we've been honored to know Tom all these years, and we have a lot of stories, but that's enough from us, and so blessings, Tom, and thanks for our friendship over these many years.
So at our table tonight we were talking, none of us knew each other before, about how we all met Tom. It was interesting how we all shared our stories. My personal story is that to Joe Monahan and Jack Hunt, who I started kindergarten with 70 years ago, they went to St. Thomas and became friends with Tom, and so I've been blessed to know Tom in that respect. And I've always thought Tom was such a cool priest. First met him, I was so impressed with him. And maybe some of you don't know this, but he and his lovely sister Ann, when they were younger, had a brother and sister dancing act. And Tom is a terrific dancer. He is a combination of Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly wrapped up in one. And Tom and I have been dancing in Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Washington, D.C., and I have never said this publicly because I've danced with a lot of men, that Tom, you are my very favorite dancing partner. But at our age, he's my only dancing partner. And we all know that Tom has all these friends. Recently, the New York Times had an article saying an American person knows 600 people. And I thought, well, if the average American knows 600 people, Tom knows 600,000 people. I don't think Tom's ever met anybody who didn't become an instant friend and then he immediately invited him to a party. And I thought, Tom is so popular. Last summer, I was thinking when the Republicans and the Democrats had their convention, that wouldn't it be wonderful if one of the parties nominated Tom as the presidential candidate. Well, then of course that passed over, and then when Pope Benedict resigned, I started thinking, well, maybe the cardinals in their good wisdom would elect Tom as the Pope. Because just think what the world would be like if Tom was a leader of the world. This would be such a gorgeous, beautiful, peaceful place. We would be doing all kinds of works of charity all day long. The fortunate would be helping the unfortunate. We'd be spreading love, kindness. We'd be smiling. There'd be no road rage. We would never have to worry about prohibition coming back into... And the best thing would be that during the day, we'd be doing all these wonderful things until sunset. And then, after sunset, party, 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 party. So anyway, Tom, you have just, I know you've taken the road not traveled by many times, and it has been very difficult for you, literally as well as figuratively. One time Tom came to visit me in Washington, D.C., where I'm now living, and he was on his way up to see the Kernans. And so he leased a car at the airport, and he called me, and I gave him directions how to get to my house. I'm about 20 minutes away from the airport. An hour and a half passed, and Tom wasn't there. The phone finally rang, and he said, Diane, I think I got off on the wrong exit. So I said, Tom, where are you? And he told me, and so I gave him directions how to get back to 495. Another hour or so passed. Now it's late afternoon. Tom calls me again, and he says, Diane, I don't know where I am. I'm lost. And I said, well, Tom, what does the street sign say? And he said, I don't see any street signs. And I said, well, just go into a store and ask somebody how do I get to 495? And he said, there aren't any stores around. I said, Tom, when you look out the windshield, what do you see? And he said, I see a pasture with some cows. And I think there's some goats over there. So anyway, he's added a lot of color to my life and to all of ours. And Tom, this party is over the top. And as a dedicated priest and a wonderful friend, you're over the top too.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Actually, it's a privilege for me to be here this evening. Tom has been a good friend of mine for a long it started back in 1985, as a matter of fact, when I became the new associate at Holy Spirit in St. Paul. So it's been that long that we've had this wonderful relationship. I was there for 6 years. As I like to tell people that, when I went there in 1985, 150 pounds. And this is all that's left. After 6 years with this man. But they were good years. I learned a lot. I learned a lot under Tom. I never knew how to make a Rob Roy before I went there. I never knew the taste of a fine cigar before I went there. And so there were a lot of things that happened during that time. And Tom, as you know, when I went there, he was much more of a wallflower. He was much more of a drunk. So our time together really drew him out. But I can honestly tell you this, and I think he would disagree, but I could honestly say that during my 6 years there, I remember Tom actually sitting home in the rectory by himself one time. There were always these last minute plans to go out, and we could be sitting there watching the news, and he'd turn over and he'd say, Raj, what are you doing tonight? And if I said, I'm going out someplace, he'd all of a sudden pick up the phone, call someone, and make a date with them. Or, what are you doing tonight? This kind of thing. The other thing that, we're in some ways very opposite in this regard. But Tom is out there, and he is just going to kind of, introduce himself and get involved. But we go out on Sunday nights. We still do that. There's a group of us that go down to Mancini's on Sunday night. But back in the day, it was the Parker House. And we started going to the Parker House. And quite often, coming home, I just wanted to go straight home. And Tom would always say, at 9 o'clock at night, a Sunday night, people have to get up and work the next day. And Tom would always go, you know who'd love to see us? Yeah, St. Paul's finest would like to see us, but who would like to? So-and-so would like to see us. So we go and we ring that doorbell, and they come to the door and go, oh, Father. And inevitably on the way home, at 10 o'clock or whatever, 10:30, Tom would say, oh, they just love the fact that we stopped by this evening. One of the other things that Tom introduced me to is love for horse racing. During my time there, they opened up Canterbury, and Tom used to go out there quite often. And Tom, actually, you were part owner of a couple of horses, right? I'll let you guess which part. Usually the one that came in last. I don't, the one horse that I remember, the name of the one horse that I remember was Sir Evil. Remember Sir Evil? Who's the other? Did you have two horses? One horse? Vacillate. Vacillate. Okay. Vacillate. No, not Vaseline. Vacillate. But not the best horses around. But Tom enjoyed the sport. But I have to tell you, that he was not a wise investor. He didn't know that much about horses. I mean, Sir Evil, that was a terrible horse. That was terrible. That horse was slow.
How slow was he?
He was so slow that they would time that horse with a calendar. I tell you, that horse was slow.
How slow was he?
That horse was so slow that they used to instruct the jockey to go to the whip the day before the race. That horse was slow, I gotta tell you that. It was a slow horse. That horse was so slow that they used to give special permission to the rider, the jockey, to take bathroom breaks along the way. That horse was slow. But it was fun to go out to the track. We had some wonderful times out there, and Tom had some great experiences along the way also. He was down in, I don't know if you know this, but he was pastor in Faribault at the time, back before he went to Holy Spirit. And Tom had kind of a tough relationship with the mayor down there with City Hall. I don't know if you're aware of this, but one Sunday morning, Tom gets up. He looks out his window. He sees the most unusual sight. Really strange. He sees a dead mule in his yard out there, outside of the rectory. He doesn't know what to do, so he calls the police. And after he explains what he has sitting in the front yard of the rectory, the police say, hey, there's nothing we can do about that. You call the health department. Tom calls the health department. The health department on Sunday morning, whoever he gets in touch with there, the guy says, look, there's nothing really that we can do about that. He says, we can only come and remove the thing, but you need to get permission from City Hall. You need to call the mayor. Well, Tom goes, oh, I don't want to call the mayor. We've had a tough situation, a relationship down through the years. This is not going to work. But he says, I got to get this thing out of here. What are the parishioners going to think? So he calls the mayor. He's got the mayor's home phone number. He calls the mayor gets on the line. And sure enough, this guy is, he has an attitude. And the guy, says to Tom, he says, well, what do you want me to do about it? Tom says, well, I want you to get someone to come over and take this thing out of here. And Tom says, well, no. He says, you're going to have to take care of this. And the mayor says, well, look, aren't you the one responsible, for burying the dead? And Tom says, well, yes, but it's also my responsibility to contact the next of kin. So there you go. One more and then I'm done. All right? One more and then I'm done. Another one of Tom's assignments, and he was there early on, and he decided, as Tom would, that he wants to meet some of his parishioners. And being very social as he is, he goes out one day and he comes upon this house and he rings the doorbell, and he can tell that someone's inside. He just has a sense that someone's inside, but they don't come to the door. So Tom's feeling a bit slighted. And so what he does is he pulls out a note, a Post-it note, and he writes on the note, he writes Revelation 3:20, and he sticks it in the door. Revelation 3:20, sticks it in the door. The next day, as he's helping to count the offering on Sunday morning, he comes across a note. And he found in the collection plate a message with a notation, Genesis 3:10. Now Revelation 3:20 reads, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and will dine with him and he with me." Genesis 3:10 reads, "And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked." So, anyway. He's never had the best of luck, you know. But Tom, not only the 6 years that we spent together, but well beyond that, I think the most important thing that you taught me as a priest and as a person is how to be pastoral, how to be people-oriented, and you've always been there for folks. You've always been there, certainly in the best of times, but also in the difficult times. If you've never stood back and been, reluctant or afraid to move into all of these different kinds of situations. And I've learned a lot from that. I greatly appreciate your friendship and your love. Love you.
Yeah.
Volunteers to talk for me, to follow those close friends of Father Tom, and the humor and the love and the it's just amazing. And I'm up here thinking, what am I going to say? I'm one of the volunteers that when I got down here to this spot, Father Tom leaned forward and said, "I may need you want to get up and say a few words for me." So, just a few words. But the thing that I have to, a little bit more serious, and then just one short story, which I love, is that the thing that we had the opportunity to meet Tom when we were moving into Highland Catholic community, and friends of ours, we were trying to get into the school, and they said, well, if you want to get into the school, you've got to meet Father Tom. And so we met with him, and we had dinner, and then the next thing we knew that our kids were able to get into the school, and we very much appreciate that because that community was very important to us. And so, and from that, it just proceeded to where we had the opportunity to go to India with Father Tom for 2 weeks. And it's still just kind of in the early days of getting to know Father Tom. And I was chatting with him. He was telling me about a time when he was traveling. I think it was, I'm going to exaggerate because every time I tell this story, it gets a little bit more dramatic. But Father Tom was traveling to Thailand and landed in the airport, took a 5-minute cab ride to his hotel, and 2 years later went back to Thailand and spent 2 weeks with a cab driver and his family in rural Thailand. That's an amazing gift, and it's the ability to really touch people and connect with them in a way that I don't know anybody in my life that can do that. And that's how the trip to India occurred. That Father Tom was in India, standing in the middle of the street, and something like this, I don't want to exaggerate, but something like, after he was looking for a place to stay, and he was supposed to be at the bishop's house, and he couldn't go to the bishop's house, so he's in the middle of Calcutta, in the street, just looking around, what am I going to do? And Father Peter Anthony came up and said, can I help you? And he ended up spending, 2 weeks in Father Peter's closet. It was inside. So we ended up going to see Father some years later, and it was just an amazing trip. Father Peter became a priest at the wishes of Mother Teresa. And it was just this wonderful spiritual trip for us. We just amazing experiences going through all of the things that Mother Teresa was able to do, which simply are impossible. So it was this wonderful trip, and I just remember this one moment. One of Mother Teresa's homes was for those with persistent mental illness, and we were going through this site. And Father Tom was in this area, and there was this young woman from, I think it was Japan or something. And we're going through this, and she saw or heard that Father Peter was a priest, Father Tom was a priest, and asked Father Tom if he would bless her. And so she became very still, and in the moment, and Tom was very serious, and it lasted. I watched this, and I thought, gosh, what an opportunity, what a gift to be able to impart something to someone that was so meaningful. And after Tom finished, he walked over to me. He goes, "God, I love my job."
I got to meet this man. It was like so many of you as parishioners in whatever parish you joined. And in my case, it was to St. Gregory's, the erstwhile St. Gregory's, and Father Bowers here. Who took it up? I was going to praise you for what happened to St. Gregory's, but he was your predecessor, and the one that I joined, and he said, I'm going to Vietnam next week or next month, I forget what it was, and I'd sure love to go to India from there. And this is sort of a variation on the story, not a variation, but an offshoot of the story that Tom just related about Thomas P. Hunstiger in Calcutta. I happened to sort of set up that trip to India at the time, and his first visit to India was to Calcutta, which is not recommended for a platinum elite traveler. And he wound up being in something that he describes as a janitor's closet in a school for a couple of days. And I happened to be on assignment in India at the time at Delhi, and I said, well, I'll meet him at Delhi when he comes there from Calcutta and surprise him. And we hadn't known each other that well at that point. It had probably been a couple of months or so, I'm thinking. And so I'm in the hordes of people waiting for people coming off the plane, and I see Father Tom get off the plane in Delhi and looked like he'd spent 3 nights in a janitor's closet in Calcutta. And he lit up when he saw me. He said, "Oh, it's so nice to see a familiar face." And I said, "Well, Father, I've taken a couple of days off, and we'll go see the Taj Mahal tomorrow, and I've got a hotel lined up for you." He said, "Oh, that's wonderful." He says wonderful by dropping the D in a way that only Father Tom can. He said, "Isn't that wonderful?" And so we're driving in Delhi for about 15 or 20 minutes, and he turns to me and he says, "I didn't catch your first name." And I said to myself, "I wonder what he's been sniffing in that janitor's closet." I said, "It's Fred." "Oh, Fred, okay. It's not the Fred from St. Paul, is it?" I said, "Yes, this is the Fred from St. Paul." So it kind of betrays the trusting that this man has in humanity. He just goes where it feels right, and sometimes it isn't right. About a few months later, on a subsequent trip to India, which I was not on, but he went off on his own. I can remember getting home, and it's 10 o'clock, and we're getting to bed in St. Paul, and I get a call. I said, "Hey, Fred, I'm in Delhi, and I'm in kind of a jam." I'll let him finish that story for you, but it involved Thomas B. coming to our house, meeting a friend of ours, whose name is Sharma, which is like being called Johnson in Duluth. It's a very common name. And he did not get the address of this man, winds up in India on just his telephone number. And this could have been dangerous, but it wasn't. And we managed to sort this thing out. But this is a man who trusts people until they prove him wrong. And it's just so telling. I want to wrap up this evening by, I'm a journalist and I take notes. And I was taking notes of the conversation around the table just very recently. Just reflecting on the man as he was schmoozing at the other tables. And one of the things that I think Sis said, and she knows him for 70 plus years, as she pointed out, she said, "I have never heard him say anything bad about anybody in my life. I can never remember him saying anything about anybody." And Roger Henke, one of the long-distance visitors from San Diego, he said, "No matter the religious, political, theological view, he's just the most accepting person on the planet." And Thomas B. had returned to the table by then, and he said, "That's just my image of God." And I thought that kind of sums up what this man is all about. He said, "That's just my image of God." And we're all very privileged to know you, Thomas B. You really are one special priest, and you've really helped many of us keep our faith, enhance our faith, and just be better people. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I just feel so overwhelmed with love and tonight, and I was just thinking of that wonderful story of India, of going into that home that Fred was talking about, and that nurse asking for a blessing. And I've shared this story this week, but it's been a reminder of to me, of what priesthood's all about. I was Maureen and Tom down there,
And I was going down the escalator at Nordstrom's, and I was thinking of this week when I was buying this shirt. Going down the escalator and looking at the women's shoe department, and there's a couch there. And I remembered so vividly Maureen's mother and her wonderful Aunt Adeline that I knew so well, and they were sitting there. And they started yelling, "Father Tom, Father Tom." And I went over there, and they said, "Could we have a blessing?" And I went over there, and all of a sudden, some of the women in the shoe department came and joined us for a blessing. And I was thinking of how that's a story of my priesthood, of affirming the Lord's presence, celebrating the Lord's presence in our lives. And that's what it's all about. I wasn't bringing the Lord to anybody at that point in that little couch at Nordstrom's, but celebrating that God was with them. And I look around this room for all of us, because I've been part of your life. Good days and bad days. God's with you. And one of the great stories I have of going around serving the poor, I was down in Zimbrona, and I've told this story, trying to convey the idea that none of us are perfect. So I got up there in the homily and I said, "I'd like to have anybody here perfect, please stand." And I look around and I said, "Nobody's standing." After Mass, an usher comes up to me and says, "I've always wanted to meet somebody like you." I said, "Really? Why?" He says, "Because you're the only one standing." And I looked at this usher down in Zimbrona and I said, "You just nailed me." All of us come here recipients of God's care, and I have received so much love from each and every one of you. And I cannot thank you enough this day for being here tonight. And I want to thank Leo and Molly Varley, and I want to thank Greg and DeMarco, my Lord, I go blank here. Dear friends who have helped host this, thank you so very, very much. And I just want to thank each one of you for your gift of your presence. People coming from so far, Florida, Paris, Pierre and Celine, thank you. Coming in yesterday from Paris. And Roger from California, and so many of you. And my sister's beautiful family that I love so dearly. So thank you for the God's gift of your presence and your goodness. God love you all. We can continue to celebrate. So.